Is our prosecuting attorney for the County of Jackson, Jarzynka. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Bart. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, great to have you here, and we'll share the pie and cake with Jerry after the show.
It looks delicious. Looks great.
Well, I know you're a fan of Steve's Ranch, so Jerry, I'm sure, is in agreement with me with her awesome cakes and pies.
There's quite a selection. If you can't find something you want, you're missing something.
That's right. Well, the prosecutor's office has been busy. You've had a couple of high-profile sentencings and a verdict in just the last couple of weeks.
It's been busy. Yeah, just last week, Judge Jordan passed sentence in the Leandro Martin case. There was a verdict earlier this spring. This is a murder case that happened last August outside the Greenwood beverage party store in the city of Jackson, and resulted in the death of Marquita Smith. And so we're really pleased with Judge Jordan's sentence. She sentenced 50 to 80 years on a second-degree murder conviction and then 2 years for the felony firearm. So meaning that the defendant, Leandro Martin, would have to serve a minimum of 52 years before being eligible for parole. So very tough sentence. Very strong sentence that the judge gave, so very pleased, very happy for the victim's family and our community. That was a great case. It's a very violent crime that shouldn't have happened. As you might remember, Leandro Martin had been convicted earlier within the last couple years. There was a shooting incident outside the train station here in town, and he was convicted of assault with intent to murder. But his conviction was overturned by the Court of Appeals because he had requested a self-defense instruction, wasn't given, so that conviction was set aside, and basically he was awaiting trial on that case when this new murder occurred.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, but in the end though, Judge Jordan, I think, gave him just a really strong sentence, so very pleased with that. Then, on the heels of that, earlier this spring we had another murder case. Frankie Ackley, he was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. That was a case, it was an older case. It happened in March of 2020, so really the beginning of the COVID time period, when James Cooper Robertson was murdered by Frankie Ackley outside of Duffy's Bar. Still, that's a very strong sentence as well, so we're pleased with that in that case. And just a couple weeks ago, we had a major criminal sexual conduct case. Jury came back guilty regarding Michael Baxter. It was a great result, 4 counts of CSC, or criminal sexual conduct, the first degree, which is a life offense in each of those counts. Sentence is going to be August 3rd before Judge Wilson. Very pleased with that result because, unlike other CSC cases, this one didn't have any scientific or DNA evidence. It basically was relying on testimony of 2 victims who were minor age when this happened. And it was kind of an unusual case in that it was an older case with delayed reporting of the actual assaults that occurred, from a time period of roughly the mid-90s to the mid-2000 time period. So older case. So this was a very difficult case for the jury to make a decision on, but cases like this, normally you bring in other victims as evidence of prior bad acts in order to persuade the jury of what happened.
Yeah, that's going to be very difficult without scientific evidence. It's almost like he said, she said. But corroboration from other victims, is that something that you have to ask the judge to allow?
You do. There's certain rules of evidence under Michigan law that you can ask ahead of time, before the trial starts, to get a ruling from the judge to see if he would allow certain types of evidence to come in. So we had a number of witnesses who were, prior bad acts evidence that the judge allowed, and I think that was crucial to helping the jury reach a decision in this case.
And in these cases, how important is the work in the testimony of the investigating police officers?
Well, it's very important, especially you can imagine if you have to go back and locate different witnesses, and especially if you're talking about a time period that goes back pretty far. We're talking mid-90s to 2000s.
Mid-90s?
Yes,
Wow.
trying to track down other victims, other witnesses. That takes a lot of legwork to do that. And then you have to hope that you find, testimony that's going to be helpful, and also you're looking for cooperation, because it's not easy to come to court to testify, and especially about a sexual assault or that type of crime. It's so intimate, so personal, that's difficult to ask a victim to speak about in front of 12 strangers. But in this case, that happened, and we're really, really pleased with that result.
Great. And you had, I see Detective Sergeant Brian Huttenlocker on a couple of those cases. So it's his work and his team's work, plus they actually have to, they have to deliver testimony and evidence in the trial, too.
They do. When you're the trial prosecutor, you really rely on your officer in charge, or in most cases your detective. So Detective Huttenlocker is key, especially if you're trying to gather in evidence, especially witnesses from really some time ago, and to find the evidence and then to actually get cooperation to willing to be able to testify.
So with such a cold case, how does it get revived? And I guess in this particular example, the Michael Baxter case, going back 25 some years, how does it get reactivated, brought back?
Well, it can come back in a lot of different ways. It can be a situation where someone makes a report, and then that goes to a police agency, and that starts the investigation. And then it starts from there, going back further and starting to talk to people and witnesses. An older case is a little bit different in that you have the obstacle of time. As more time goes by, your evidence gets older, it's more difficult to bring it to court. People may have moved, people may have died, memories, fade. Those are more difficult. Typically in a sexual assault case that's a little bit newer, I'd say within 5 years or less, typically if it's a child, they will make a complaint. If it's a mandatory reporter, then that triggers a whole set of things, whether it's police getting involved or Child Protective Services, and that can also trigger an interview at our Child Advocacy Center. The child's interviewed, and they may disclose something, and then that leads to more investigation and potentially a possible criminal charge.
Well, I would say hats off to you and your prosecuting team, along with the police agencies, that recognize that this is going to be a tough case to begin with, and to take it on.
Well, in our office, my chief assistant, Katie Rozmirsky, and several of our assistant prosecutors have a criminal sexual conduct unit where they look at cases that come in, evaluate them, and then make charging decisions or recommendations, and then pursue them. Because these cases are a little bit different than our normal crimes in that, one, you've got the very personal, intimate nature of the crime, but two, there are certain rules that are a little bit different evidence-wise to get in certain pieces of testimony. And so having some knowledge of those rules, some nuances, that's really important, especially trying to try them when you don't have scientific evidence. It becomes a very, very difficult case.
Well, great. Nice job. The department and you personally are very involved in the task force, the Heroin and Prescription Drug Abuse Task Force, and you've got another quarterly meeting coming up.
We do, yes. July 18th at Andy's place in the afternoon from 1:30 to 4 o'clock. The work groups are going to meet and report out about what they've been doing on their goals since the first meeting we had in April. And so they're broken down into 6 groups: law enforcement, we have faith-based, we've got prevention, treatment, and recovery, we have family impact, and we've got medical. And so the 5 groups, the first 5 do meet and they'll report, and they all have different what the basic goals are basically looking at trying to address our opioid epidemic issues from their different perspectives and skill sets. I found that's been very successful. I mean, since we started our first summit in 2014. The medical group broke off and they meet at the hospital on a regular basis. And they've done some great things as trying to be careful as to, for example, how much painkillers are prescribed, across the board in their system, which we found out early on in the task force is that, most heroin addiction or substance use disorders started with, 4 to 5 cases prescription opioids. That's how someone gets hooked on them, and then before you know it, they're buying heroin powder off the street.
Well, it's happening at Andy's place, and Jerry, I had not been inside Andy's place until just a couple of weeks ago. What an amazing facility, and they're planning on building 2 more units right there across the parking lot. And I talked to some of the residents, and so I understand how important it is to those people in their recovery.
Definitely. It was a huge accomplishment from the drug summits and our task force work group meetings. That was a huge goal. The fact that it's reality is just amazing, because when we started, this was like, trying to do a manned mission to the moon. It was just really a crazy long goal, but you never know. You set big goals, you can achieve them. And Mike Hurst, his family, and many other people in the community, I give my hats off for them to doing that, because it's helped a lot of people already.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Mike told me a couple of weeks ago one of the concerns, we don't want this in our neighborhood. Well, the lowest crime rate in all of Jackson County is where Andy's place is.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exhibit A. So
that's great. And we've got a new law going into effect on June 30th.
Right.
How much do you think that's going to impact your office?
Well, I don't think it's going to impact our office significantly, because the legislature basically, didn't pass a law that creates a crime. It just creates a civil infraction. Which
distracted driving, by the way.
Distracted driving, yes. So that's effective this Friday, June 30th, and so it means you can only use cell phones if you're hands-free. So whether if your car doesn't have the technology, you have to have some type of device to hold your phone and then operate it without using your hands. And if you fail to do that, there is a fine of $100 for first offense or community service of 16 hours. Subsequent offenses, the fine goes up to $250, 24 hours community service. If you do have 3 violations within 3 years, you have to take a basic course of driving again. And if you don't want to do that, your license is going to be revoked. So there's some teeth to that, but I think citizens have to know that even if you're stopped at a stop light or stop sign, you still can't physically, manually hold your phone. It has to be hands-free. There are some exceptions. If there's an emergency call or if you're reporting a crime, that's an exception to that law.
Yeah, and I've heard people, question the being stopped at the stoplight, stop sign thing. But think about, maybe you're driving along and you see a green light ahead of you and there's a car just sitting there. That's potential crash that could occur.
Correct. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think the intent of the law is good. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully, the initial days of enforcement that our police officers will give our citizens a little bit of slack as we get used to trying to comply with that law.
Right. Thanks for all the information today, Jerry.
Bart, thanks for having me on.
Our Jackson County prosecuting attorney, Jerry Jarzynka. Well, we are going to talk more